You have 30 seconds to pack up your fishing equipment and leave, or I'll call the police." The words that would alter everything had not yet been spoken, but they hung in the morning air like storm clouds, gathering over what ought to have been Marcus Thompson's most peaceful time of day. By the water, Marcus Thompson had always found peace. He considered himself a simple man with simple pleasures at the age of 62, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines earned from decades of genuine smiles. He bought his modest house 3 years ago because of the small lake behind Willowbrook Estates. He would carry his favorite rod and weathered tackle box to the wooden dock that extended into the mirror-like surface at dawn each day. It was a particularly peaceful Tuesday morning. As Marcus cast his line and observed the ripples spread in perfect concentric circles, lazy mist rose from the water. A loon called across the water in the distance, and a great blue heron remained motionless in the shallows. He was brought back to the reason he had relocated to this peaceful community after the death of his wife Sarah by these brief moments. Sitting next to him with a sketchbook and a watercolor sketchbook, she had always enjoyed watching him fish. The lake itself was a natural wonder, spring-fed, crystal clear, and home to numerous bird species in addition to bass and trout. Marcus could understand why it had been a gathering place for indigenous people for centuries, according to local legends. Especially in those golden hours when the sun touched the water for the first time, there was something almost spiritual about the location. Marcus thought about how fishing had saved him in the darkest days after Sarah's death, as his bobber danced gently on the water. His heart had been helped to heal by the rhythmic casting and patient waiting. He felt like he belonged to something much bigger than himself here, in the quiet symphony of nature. When he bought the house, the Homeowners Association seemed like a minor detail, just another item on the contract. How naive he had been to believe that would continue. When Priscilla Hartwell appeared on the shore, her heels slamming violently against the wooden dock, the peace was disrupted. She carried herself as president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association with the confidence of someone who believed she was born with authority. She marched toward Marcus with a manicured manila folder in her hands, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light. "Mister," she yelled, "Thompson!" And the heron flew away with an indignant cry as she did so. "We must immediately discuss your activities." Marcus noticed the tone meant trouble and slowly reeled in his line. Priscilla, now 55, had moved to Willowbrook with her husband, an investment banker, 5 years earlier. She quickly established herself as the community's self-appointed guardian of propriety. She was good at finding problems where none existed and finding solutions that were only good for her. Marcus replied calmly, "Good morning, Priscilla," but his calm mood vanished. "What a wonderful day to go fishing, isn't it?" Her expression deteriorated even more. "That's precisely why I'm here. We have received numerous complaints that your fishing activities detract from the lake's aesthetic appeal. All common areas are now off-limits to recreational fishing as a result of the board's vote." Marcus gave a disbelieving blink. "Complaints? From who? For the past 3 years, I have been fishing here in peace. I keep myself quiet, clean up after myself, and release the majority of what I catch." Priscilla carefully and theatrically opened her folder. "The lake has been designated solely for scenic purposes in the new community guidelines. The natural patterns of wildlife that our residents pay a premium to observe are disrupted and visually polluted by fishing equipment." Marcus felt the absurdity like a cold wave. Despite the fact that his fishing had actually contributed to maintaining the equilibrium of the lake's ecosystem, he paid high prices to observe the wildlife that his presence supposedly disturbed. He had even offered to help out on cleanup days, picking up trash and invasive plants that other people had ignored. Marcus discovered the true scope of Priscilla's campaign over the following weeks. She had planned a methodical effort to turn Willowbrook Estates into her ideal suburban community, enforcing stringent regulations regarding mailbox color, lawn height, and now recreational activities. The ban on fishing was only the beginning. Like unwelcome love letters, Marcus's door was covered in daily violations. $25 because he left his tackle box on the dock overnight. A fine of $50 for disturbing waterfowl during their protected morning feeding period, which Marcus seemed to only observe on Tuesdays when he fished. When he left his rod leaning against the dock railing for 10 minutes, he was charged $100 for unsightly equipment storage. With inventive interpretations of increasingly obscure rules, the notices multiplied. His fishing cooler had to be approved by the Architectural Review Board because it was deemed an unauthorized structure. Unpermitted furniture placement in common areas applied to his folding chair. Solicitation of recreational activities in prohibited zones was defined as even his habit of greeting other residents while carrying his gear. If he continued to break the rules, he would face legal action, liens on his property, and possibly foreclosure. Janet Pierce, a sharp-eyed attorney for the HOA, sent increasingly firm letters stating that Marcus would not be tolerated for his flagrant disregard for community standards. Marcus tried to reason with each member of the board, but he quickly realized that they were either afraid of Priscilla or financially dependent on her husband's connections in the investment industry. The treasurer, Tom Bradley, admitted privately that he did not support the fishing ban, but he was unable to risk publicly opposing Priscilla. His modest accounting practice was overly dependent on recommendations from her social circle. The community started to take sides. The fishing ban was supported by younger residents who were attracted to Priscilla's promise to maintain property values through strict enforcement. Marcus was silently sympathized with by longtime residents, many of whom recalled a time when the community was more laid back, but they feared reprisal. Marcus made the decision to investigate the legal basis for Priscilla's claims, refusing to give up his morning haven without a fight. He looked over property records, historical documents, and the original HOA charter for hours at the county courthouse. He discovered something that changed everything. According to county records from 1887, the lake was not actually community property as claimed by Priscilla. Clearwater Holdings, LLC, a company that appeared to have been dormant for decades, owned it privately. The original owner had granted the HOA usage rights for recreational and aesthetic purposes, which specifically included swimming, boating, and fishing. More intriguingly, Marcus learned that industrialist William Hartwell, the lake's first owner, founded Clearwater Holdings in the late 1800s. In state records, the company was still there, despite the fact that it appeared to have stopped operating since the 1960s. The law firm that was listed as the current registered agent was located 3 hours away in the state capital. Marcus contacted the law firm with this information and learned something extraordinary. The company had been inherited by William Hartwell's great-great-grandson, but he had no interest in managing the property. For decades, the family had allowed the HOA to manage the lake for free by paying minimal taxes and maintenance fees. Robert Hartwell, Jr., an elderly lawyer, was fascinated to learn about the current circumstance. He was disturbed to learn that his family's property was being mismanaged because he was unaware of the fishing ban. He also said that Clearwater Holdings had been looking for a buyer for a long time, someone who would appreciate and keep the lake's natural beauty. This was more important. For someone with Marcus's financial resources, the asking price was reasonable. He had the money to make the purchase as a retired aerospace engineer who had lived modestly and invested wisely. The question was whether he had the courage to take such a dramatic step. Legal maneuvering required 3 weeks of careful negotiation. In order to structure the purchase through a newly formed LLC, Marcus collaborated with Robert Hartwell Jr.'s attorney and kept his involvement secret until the transaction was completed. He gave his business Peaceful Waters Holdings as a nod to the community he hoped to restore. Priscilla, presumably sensing that Marcus was planning something, apparently escalated her harassment campaign in the interim. She set up community safety patrols to appear whenever he came near the lake, claiming that his presence posed dangers to children and wildlife. She put out a petition to have him removed from the community, and even people who had never met him signed it. When Priscilla persuaded the local police to issue Marcus a trespassing citation, it was the tipping point. Officer Martinez explained that the HOA had filed a complaint claiming Marcus was breaking the fishing ban in spite of multiple warnings. He was clearly uneasy about the situation. A court date and potential criminal penalties were listed on the citation. Marcus became the legal owner of the entire lake and the buffer zone surrounding it when he signed the Clearwater Holdings, LLC purchase agreement in the afternoon. In addition to the water, the property had 20 feet of shoreline all around its perimeter, including Priscilla's elaborate deck and boat dock and parts of everyone's backyard. Marcus consulted with property attorneys over the weekend regarding his rights as the new owner after the closing on Friday. He found out that the previous usage agreement with the HOA had been in place for a long time, but had never been officially renewed. Technically, every resident who had been swimming, boating, or even walking along the shore of the lake for more than a decade had been trespassing. Marcus didn't want to take revenge, but he also didn't want Priscilla to keep ruling. He had his lawyer write new usage agreements that would allow for reasonable recreational activities to be resumed while still protecting the environment. Swimming, kayaking, and other quiet activities would also be explicitly permitted. Fairness, science, and common sense would be used to enforce the new rules, not arbitrary authority. The clear and crisp Monday morning was ideal for Marcus's return to fishing. Casting his line as he had done so many times before, he positioned himself at his usual spot on the dock at dawn. After a long journey, the familiar rhythm felt like coming home. Priscilla showed up at exactly 8 with her usual entourage, which included 2 board members, a volunteer for the community patrol, and what appeared to be a process server. She strutted down the dock with the self-assurance of someone who was sure to win. "Mister, you are in direct violation of community regulations and a police citation," Thompson announced loudly enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. "Before we begin the foreclosure process, this is your final warning." Marcus did not turn around and calmly continued fishing. "Actually, Priscilla, before you make threats, I think you should check your facts." "Facts?" she grumbled. "The facts show that you are breaking clearly stated rules by trespassing on HOA property. I have legal papers here that will make you stop doing these things right away." Marcus finally turned around at that point, smiling softly from the corners of his mouth. The fascinating aspect of facts is that they can alter perspectives. Did you, for instance, know that the HOA never actually owned this lake? Priscilla's self-assurance began to wane. "Don't be irrational. It is undoubtedly community property. The association has been in charge of managing it for decades." Marcus savored the moment by slowly reeling in his line. "That's partially accurate. Clearwater Holdings, the actual owner, granted usage rights to the HOA. However, these usage rights were never renewed after they expired in 2010. Every person who has used this lake in the last 14 years has technically been trespassing." The horde of neighbors began to groan in fear. Suddenly, property values, legal responsibility, and years of assumed rights were in jeopardy. As the implications started to sink in, Priscilla's face turned pale. But more importantly, Marcus went on to say, "I'm pleased to announce that as of Friday afternoon, I am the new owner of Clearwater Holdings, and therefore the legal owner of this entire lake." This was the point that Marcus was referring to. After Marcus made his announcement, there was a profound silence. Priscilla remained frozen, the threats in her manila folder now meaningless. Recognizing the significant shift in the legal landscape, the process server quietly fled. While the neighbors started whispering about lake access and property values, board members exchanged worried glances. Marcus paused for a moment before moving on. "At this point, I want everyone to know that I have no intention of limiting the reasonable use of the lake. In point of fact, I have drafted fresh usage agreements that will reinstate many of the recreational pursuits that were previously prohibited inadvertently. He opened his own folder, which contained documents that had been written by professionals. Fishing will be explicitly allowed at all hours of daylight. Additionally, boating in peace, kayaking, and swimming will be permitted. Environmental safeguards will be reasonable, but they will be based on actual science rather than arbitrary preferences. Despite the fact that it came out as a strangled whisper, Priscilla finally found her voice. This cannot be done. Community property cannot be purchased alone. This will be fought by the HOA. The attorney for Marcus came out of the crowd and gave a cordial nod as he introduced himself. In fact, Mrs. Hartwell, the transaction is legal in every way and has been properly documented. The lake was never owned by the HOA. Rather, the usage rights expired years ago. My client is being generous by granting access in any way. Over the following days, the community felt the impact of the information. While some residents were relieved that the oppressive regulations would be lifted, others were enraged at being tricked about lake ownership. Contrary to Priscilla's warnings, the return to reasonable community standards actually led to an increase in property values. The residents who had been persuaded to abandon their own lake activities joined Marcus as he resumed his morning fishing practice. Evening kayak tours became a common community tradition. Elderly residents brought their grandchildren to feed ducks, and children resumed swimming lessons. Priscilla's authority was permanently undermined when she resigned from the HOA board within a month. Residents who were sick of being micromanaged elected a new board that prioritized actual community needs over aesthetic control. Finally, free to express himself, Tom Bradley ran on a platform of sensible governance to win the presidency. He thought about Sarah and how she would have loved this victory for community spirit over petty tyranny as he cast his line on that first peaceful morning as the owner of Tumho, as the owner of the lake, and watched the sun paint the water gold. Owning something beautiful is sometimes the best way to keep it for future generations to enjoy responsibly. The community had regained its equilibrium, and the lake had found a guardian.